A lot of people comment that they were having trouble figuring out which biomolecule was which just based on like chemical structures or their pictures. So I'm going to go through some of these and identify them and just talk about their different characteristics. I just grabbed a bunch of random pictures off the internet, and so you're going to be seeing the 4 biomolecules, which are lipids, carbohydrates, proteins, and nucleic. Look at our biomolecule cheat sheet really quick. So here is the biomolecule name. Here's how you can tell if you're looking at one. Here's what do they do. We're only looking at structural stuff in this video, but these are things that you should know. And here's like an example picture of one. This certainly won't cover every single one you're ever going to look at, but this is an example. So carbs, if you see a ring or a series of connected rings, that's what you're looking at, is a carbohydrate. Also, 1 carbon molecule for every water molecule, 1 carbon atom for every water molecule within the overall structure. Lipids, long chains of carbons, not much nitrogen, also not generally much phosphate. You'll see maybe 3 phosphate groups and a triphosphate. But yeah, the main characteristic of these is just long chains of carbon. Proteins, chains of amino groups. Nitrogen is involved. Nitrogen hooked up and bonded to carbon in this repeating peptide bond structure, carbon-nitrogen, carbon-nitrogen. And we'll see some more of this when we go through the examples. Nucleic acid, how do you know you're looking at it? Sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate. And then there's base pairs connected to these sugars. So sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate. And each of these sugars has a base pair connected to it. So let's get into it. Nucleic acid. So here you can see, and this is kind of cheap actually, because it says peptide bonds right here. And if you see a peptide bond, you know immediately that you're looking at a protein. The big clue here, though, is that there are nitrogens here. I'm not expecting you guys to know necessarily that what a peptide bond is, but if you see a bunch of stuff stuck together and there are nitrogens involved in it, you're looking at a protein. Okay, so this is a protein. It's a chain of these, it's amino acids, and a lot of folks get confused between amino acids and nucleic acids. They're not the same thing. Be aware of that. That's a test question I like to throw out because people miss that one pretty often, and there is a huge difference. But if you see nitrogens involved and there's a bunch of them and they're all chained together, you are looking at a protein. So here is a nice double helix. Something I definitely want you guys to know is that nucleic acids have this double helical shape to them. So it's got this helix, it's got this stair step of these things going up. That's a nucleic acid. Okay, this one's super simple. It says amino acid here, which again, you should know is the subunit of a protein. But again, if it didn't say amino acid, if it didn't say peptide bond, you would see these nitrogens here all chained together. Nitrogens chained together, that is a protein. So what do you think? Before I answer, what do you think this one is? Long chains of carbon, don't see any nitrogen involved. This is a lipid. This is definitely a lipid that we're looking at here. Again, you've got these groups up here, but the important thing to note is there's just these long chains of carbons. So I see 2 rings here. There's actually carbons hiding in here. Everywhere where you see one of these junctions, there is a carbon. But I see a ring. When you see a ring, you should think carbohydrate, right? When you see a ring, you should think carbohydrate. So this is a carbohydrate. Okay, same thing here. I see 3 rings. I see 3 different carbohydrates. Okay, what do you see? I see nitrogens chained together. These are different amino acids. And there is a carboxyl terminus and an amino terminus. That's not something you guys necessarily need to know, but I see nitrogens chained together. I see a protein. Okay, this one's super simple because it gives it away. I'm not going to be giving it away to you like this, but before you even start like looking at all these different words, I see a sugar. You should know it's a sugar because it's like a ring structure thing here. No nitrogen involved. There's a ring over here too, but don't worry about that. These are the nitrogen bases. But I see a ring structure here, and then I see a phosphate, and then I see a ring structure here, and then I see a phosphate. I see sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate. Okay, this is a nucleic acid. Sugar, phosphate with these nitrogenous bases in the middle. Okay, this one, this is kind of cheesy. This is a peptide bond that's about to happen. I probably wouldn't show you something like this, but there is a what's called a dehydration reaction that's going to take place here, and this carbon is going to get hooked together with this nitrogen. So this is about to be a polypeptide. These are individually amino acids. They're also called peptides. I wouldn't show you something like this necessarily, but this nitrogen is about to get together with this carbon. This is the start of a protein. Okay, long chains of carbons. No nitrogens involved. I mean, there's one, but it's not prominent enough to make it into one of the other types. So you see long chains of carbon, you should be thinking lipid. Okay, long chains of carbon, not connected to anything else, you should be thinking this is a lipid. Here's a nitrogen to connect to a carbon. Here's a nitrogen, nitrogen, nitrogen. I see a lot of nitrogens here. This is a protein. This R group, by the way, means that there's a bunch of chemical stuff going on here. They were just lazy when they drew this. These R groups signify that there's more going on up here. They just didn't want to draw it in. Anyway, I see a bunch of nitrogens connected all together. So yeah, you might be saying, but Aaron, it's a long chain of carbons, but there's a bunch of nitrogens in here that are connected as well. It's not like this one where there was just like the odd nitrogen here, maybe another one here that I'm not seeing. And you might say, well, you know, here's a phosphate group. Is this a nucleic acid? Well, no, there's only one of them. There's not really any sugar here. So yes, the nitrogens are integral to this particular molecule. This is a protein. All right, what do you think? What are we thinking about this one? What do we think about this one? Just see a long chain of carbons. Just see a long chain of carbons. I'm thinking this is a lipid. This reminds me of lipid. There's no phosphates anywhere. There's no sugar anywhere. There's no nitrogen anywhere. This is just a lipid. Phosphate, sugar, nitrogenous base. This is a nucleic acid. Okay, this is a nucleic acid. This is a nucleotide, I think, technically, but yeah, I wouldn't show you, I would give you more than this. I'd give you phosphate, sugar, as the pattern describes. I'd show more nitrogen bases or nitrogenous bases. So, but this is a nucleic acid. Phosphate, sugar, it's pretty obvious. Double helix, what are we thinking? I am thinking, again, nucleic acid. It's even shown phosphate, sugar, and the sugars are connected to these nitrogenous bases. Phosphate, sugar, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, nitrogen base. This is a nucleic acid. I wouldn't show it to you in this form, but you should be able to identify phosphate connected to these sugars. How do we know these are sugars, by the way? Because they're rings. And again, in my class, it's a simplification, but in my class, if you see a ring, it is a carbohydrate. Not everything in nature that is a ring is a carbohydrate, but for our purposes, unless I specify otherwise, you're looking at a carbohydrate. So sugar or carbohydrate, phosphate, carbohydrate, phosphate. Okay, I just kind of talked about this concept a lot. You should probably have seen this molecule in the lecture when I was going over metabolism, or the lectures when I was going over metabolism. This looks to me like a glucose molecule, and glucose is, of course, a carbohydrate. Okay, so we have two here, but again, should be reasonably simple. We have long chains of carbon on both of them. Both of these have long chains of carbon. How do we know it's not a carbohydrate? There's not really any ring structures here. How do we know it's not a nucleic acid? Well, I don't see any phosphates at all. I don't see, again, there's also no ring sugar structures. There's no nitrogenous bases. How do we know it's not a protein? Because I don't even see any nitrogen, but you don't see a whole bunch of nitrogens chained to carbons, right? So this, by process of elimination, this must be a lipid. So let's go really quick. Here is a carbohydrate because it is a ring. Also, if you were to count the carbons, you would notice that there is 1 carbon to 1 water. This is a nucleic acid because you have a carbohydrate and then a phosphate, then a carbohydrate and then a phosphate, and you have nitrogenous bases in the middle. And again, a lipid because you have long chains of carbons. And here is a nucleic acid where you have carbons and nitrogens chained together in this format. So whenever you have carbons and nitrogens, I shouldn't say whenever, but when you have long chains of carbons and nitrogens hooked together, whenever you have these amino acids, you are dealing with a protein.